It was a time when Israel was engulfed in darkness. After King Solomon passed away, the chosen people gradually forgot the Lord under the reign of Ahab, the worst king Israel had ever known. The blood of innocent prophets stained the Holy Land, red-hunted and destroyed by the wicked Queen Jezebel. The people of Israel had forgotten the name of the Lord, and instead they bowed before altars made of stone and wood. Yet the Lord did not abandon his people. Deep within the hills of Gilead, God was preparing an answer. From that barren, forgotten land emerged a man who would change history forever, Elijah. His name bore the promise of judgment and fire. The God of my faith is Yahweh. This is the story of the greatest prophet who commanded the heavens to close, called fire down from heaven, and never tasted death. But it is also the story of the man behind the prophet with his fears, doubts, and loneliness. For Elijah was human, and his greatest battle was not against kings or armies, but against himself, against his own doubts and the loneliness that burned him from within until it overwhelmed him. For many years, Elijah lived in silence, hidden among the barren mountains. He was neither warrior nor priest. He wore garments made of camel hair. A thick beard covered his face, and his eyes burned with a supernatural flame. But one day the Lord revealed to him his calling. At last the waiting came to an end. Elijah rose, descended the mountain, and marched straight to the heart of corruption, Samaria the capital, where King Ahab ruled alongside Jezebel. The soldiers stationed at the palace gates, upon seeing him approach, stood frozen, paralyzed by an invisible power allowing him to pass as if the very air parted before him. Elijah walked through the throne room corridor without announcement or escort. Servants stepped back at every footfall. The palace pillars, accustomed to bowing to kings and ambassadors, now seemed to witness something altogether different. A wild prophet, crowned with neither crown nor sword, striding forward as if led by the Lord himself. And Ahab sat upon his throne, surrounded by advisors, idols, and vanity. But before the king could inquire who this stranger was, Elijah boldly stood before him and spoke words that would seal the fate of the kingdom. As surely as the Lord lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain these years unless I command it. Silence fell like judgment. No one dared to breathe. Elijah did not wait for a reply. He turned abruptly and vanished the same way he had come. Ahab said nothing. He did not order Elijah's arrest nor curse him. He merely sat motionless. And then it began. Suddenly the clouds began to vanish. The air grew dry. The sky above closed like a door shut tight from on high. As Elijah departed, the Lord spoke to him again. Leave this place, go eastward, and hide by the brook Cherith east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. Elijah obeyed without hesitation and journeyed eastward, while the land behind him turned barren. The cool breeze ceased, and the morning dew that once moistened Israel's fields no longer fell. The sun scorched the fields, and the nation once fertile and prosperous began to wither. The judgment had begun, and for a long 3 years not a single drop of rain touched the ground. But as the kingdom faced drought, Elijah traveled over hills and valleys until he found that refuge, Cherith. The Cherith brook lay hidden among the dry hills near the Jordan River. A thin ribbon of water carved through the earth like a scar, weaving between dry stones and thorn bushes. Elijah settled at this hidden oasis deep in the wilderness, where each sunrise and sunset brought forth a miracle. At dawn, as the sun began to rise in the east, the sound of wings suddenly broke the silence of the sky. Ravens, black-feathered birds, appeared along the horizon, carrying bread and meat in their beaks. They would perch near the prophet's dwelling place, food before him, then soar away and vanish into the heavens. These were birds considered unclean by the law, creatures despised by man. Yet these were the ones God chose to provide sustenance morning and evening, as the hills were bathed in amber light fading with the sun. To profound solitude, Elijah ate in silence and drank from the brook, watching days pass into weeks and weeks stretch into months. And this drought, like a silent curse, spread darkness over all Israel. The wells ran dry. The fields grew barren. Animals weakened and collapsed on cracked earth. From his throne, Ahab shouted desperate commands to find the one responsible for his ruin. But no news came. Elijah remained hidden by the brook. Yet gradually he noticed a change. Stones once submerged now emerged like islands along the riverbed. The once mighty flow dwindled to mere trickles. The very drought he had foretold had come upon him at last. Until one morning when he bent down to drink water, he saw no water, only moisture among the stones. The Kerith stream had dried up, but Elijah was neither afraid nor complaining. He simply held fast to his faith and waited until the voice of the Lord finally spoke clearly. "Rise up, go to Zarephath in Sidon, and stay there. I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." The Lord sent him to the dangerous land of Zarephath, the home of Jezebel, the queen who had sworn to destroy all his prophets. Yet Elijah did not hesitate. He rose, wrapped his cloak tightly around himself, and began the journey. The journey was arduous. The sun relentlessly beat down on cracked fields and withered trees. The drought spared no one, and every living creature seemed to bow before the judgment Elijah had proclaimed. When Elijah finally reached the gates of Zarephath, suddenly he saw her, a frail woman in tattered clothes gathering dry branches, her face weary, hands cracked and eyes hollow. Something deep within his soul affirmed this. This was the widow. Elijah approached, his voice calm and his face weathered by sun and desert wind, and said, "Please bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink." The woman, still unaware of who he was, obediently turned. But before she could take another step, Elijah continued, "And please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." Then she stopped, her eyes cast down, voice trembling, as she replied, "As surely as the Lord, the living God, whom you serve, I have no bread. I only have a handful of flour in the jar and a little oil left in the jug. I am gathering a few sticks to prepare the last meal for myself and my son. Then we will die." And there, in that silent moment, a truth deeper than the drought was revealed. The crisis was not only in the heavens, it had touched the very depths of their hearts, stealing their hope. Elijah gently answered, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first bake a small loaf of bread for me and bring it here. Then bake something for yourself and your son. For the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth." The woman stared at him in silence. She faced a choice: to cling to the little she had left, or to let go and trust. She could die with honor or obey and see what would happen. She chose not to trust Baal, not to trust the idols of her people, nor even her own instincts. She chose to trust the word of a stranger, a dusty wanderer whose eyes seemed to have witnessed more than any man could bear. She returned home kindled, a fire poured the flour, mixed the oil, and baked. And when she returned, the jar of the flour remained and the oil never ran dry. That day all three ate, she, her son, and Elijah. Then the next day and the day after that for many days. But suddenly her son fell ill. At first it was only a fever. Then his breath grew shallow until the child stopped breathing within hours. The mother collapsed, grief consuming her from within. "Did you come to remind me of my sin?" she cried out. "Did you come only to kill my son?" Elijah said nothing. He gently lifted the child, carried him to the upper room where he had been staying, laid him on the bed, and cried out to heaven, "O Lord my God, O Lord my God," Elijah cried. "Did you bring disaster upon this widow who welcomed me into her home by taking her son?" Then he did something no prophet had ever done. Elijah lay upon the child 3 times as though hoping to pour the life of his own spirit into the boy's body, and prayed in desperate plea, O Lord my God, please restore the life of this child." A long, heavy silence followed, unbearable, until finally the child's chest rose, his lips parted, and breath returned to his body. Elijah carried the living child down the stairs, presented him to his mother, and said, "See, your son has been restored to life." At that moment, the widow regained more than just her son. She regained her faith. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she said, "Now I truly know that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord from your mouth is truth." He knelt down, pain piercing from within and without. The very man who had once brought life to this widow's household now seemed to bring death. "Have you come to remind me of my sins?" she wept aloud. "Have you come only to take my son from me?" Elijah gave no answer. Gently he lifted the child, carrying him to the upper room where he had stayed, laid him upon the bed, and cried out to heaven. "O Lord my God, O Lord my God," Elijah proclaimed, "have you brought calamity even upon this widow who welcomed me into her home by taking her son away?" Then he did something no prophet before had dared. Elijah stretched himself upon the child 3 times as though he might impart his own life into the boy's body and prayed in despair, "O Lord, O my God, restore the life of this child." A long, heavy silence followed, unbearable, until finally the boy's chest rose. His lips parted and breath returned once more to his body. Elijah carried the living child down the stairs, presented him to his mother, and declared, "See, your son lives again." In that moment, the widow regained far more than her son. She regained her faith. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spoke. "Now I truly know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord spoken through you is truth." In a land of pagan altars carved from stone and fire, worshiping false gods, a spark of genuine faith was kindled anew. Yet, the drought had not ended. For 3 long years, not a drop of rain fell, and the Lord's judgment spread over Israel. Like an open wound, cattle vanished. Wells ran dry, and the harvest became but a distant memory. First famine struck the poor, but soon even the wealthy felt its cruel sting. However, amid all this despair, not all bowed down in submission. First among the steadfast was Obadiah, the steward of King Ahab, who witnessed the king's cruelty, but refused to remain silent. Amid Ahab's persecution and slaughter of the priests and prophets of the Lord, Obadiah performed a remarkable act. He hid 100 prophets of God in 2 caves, 50 in each, and secretly provided them with bread and water. Each day he risked his own life, sustained by love for the Lord. He even concealed this from King Ahab, preserving the king's trust. One morning the king commanded Obadiah, "Go through the land and seek out grass streams, any water that remains. Perhaps we can save the horses and mules. Perhaps something yet survives." Obadiah journeyed through the ruined kingdom, crossing barren fields devoid of life, when suddenly he saw Elijah. On the dusty road, Elijah stood tall and steadfast, his eyes blazing like ancient fire. Obadiah fell to the ground and cried out, "Are you truly my lord Elijah?" "It is I," the prophet replied. "Go and tell your master, Elijah is here." Slowly Obadiah rose. Fear choked him. His eyes revealed profound anguish. "What have I done that you place my life in peril? If I tell Ahab you are here, and the Spirit of the Lord carries you away, so he cannot find you, he will kill me." Then Obadiah bowed closer and confessed his secret to Elijah. "I have faithfully served the Lord since my youth. When Jezebel went about destroying the prophets, I hid 100 of them in caves and personally cared for them. I have done all I could, Elijah, and now you ask this of me." Yet Elijah stood firm and answered, "As surely as the Lord Almighty whom I serve lives, I will stand before Ahab today." Obadiah knew he stood before one whose words seemed backed by heaven itself, and he obeyed. With a pounding heart, the young man returned to the palace and spoke words no one expected Elijah had returned. The prophet who had shut the heavens, who had humbled the king before his throne and vanished as swiftly as he appeared, had come back at last. Without hesitation, Ahab mounted his chariot and rode to the appointed place. The sun shone brightly over the parched fields just as the 2 men met, and it was Ahab who broke the silence with scorn. "Are you the troublemaker of Israel?" But Elijah looked directly into his eyes and answered firmly, "I am not the troublemaker of Israel, but you and your father's house for you have forsaken the Lord's commandments and followed Baal." Then Elijah boldly issued a challenge. "Now summon all Israel to Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who dine at Jezebel's table. Today we will see who truly is the Lord God." Ahab agreed to the challenge, and the contest began. News quickly spread across Israel, and thousands from all corners of the kingdom climbed Mount Carmel, old and young priests and soldiers, farmers and shepherds. No one wished to miss what was about to unfold. On the mountaintop, tension filled the air. On one side stood nearly 1,000 prophets of Baal and Asherah, clad in gaudy robes adorned with pagan symbols. On the other, Elijah stood alone, wrapped in a cloak worn thin by sun and wind. The prophet raised his voice and sadly asked the crowd, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The crowd was silent, as if shame itself had sealed their lips. Then Elijah stepped forward and declared the rules. "I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord, but Baal has 450 prophets. Bring 2 bulls. They shall choose 1 bull, cut it into pieces, and lay it upon the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull, lay it upon the wood, and likewise not set fire. Then you shall call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prepared the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on dry wood. Then a dreadful spectacle began. From morning till noon, the 450 prophets shouted, leapt, and danced frantically around the altar, calling on Baal. Yet there was no response. I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Bring 2 bulls. They will choose 1 bull, cut it into pieces, and lay it upon the wood, but will not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull, lay it upon the wood, and will not light the fire. Then you shall call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prepared the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on dry wood. Then a dreadful scene began. From morning until noon, the 450 prophets shouted, jumped, and danced wildly around the altar, calling upon Baal. Yet no answer came, not even the slightest sign. Baal remained silent in awkward stillness. The sun reached its peak, and Elijah, observing the pitiful scene, began to mock them bitterly. Shout louder. Perhaps Baal is deep in thought, or he is busy. Maybe he is asleep and must be awakened. In desperation, they shouted, even louder, intensifying their frenzy by cutting themselves until blood flowed. The afternoon dragged slowly on Mount Carmel. Yet still no voice answered, no fire fell. The crowd began to whisper, and Baal's powerlessness was plain for all Israel to see. Now it was Elijah's turn. Weary and resolute, the people gathered silently around him. Elijah took 12 stones, each representing one of the tribes of Israel, and rebuilt the altar of the Lord that had been broken down. He carefully arranged the wood and placed the offering upon it. Amid the drought, he prayed for the impossible, commanding them to bring 4 jars full of water and pour it over the offering. They did so once, twice, and a third time, until the altar was soaked and water filled the trench around it. Then, standing before all the people, the prophet lifted his eyes to heaven and cried out, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God of Israel and I am your servant. Everything I have done has been commanded by you. Please answer me, O Lord, please answer me, so that the people would know there is no God but you, and that you are turning their hearts back to you. A brief but profound silence followed his prayer. Suddenly, fire blazed down from heaven, fierce, alive, and consuming, instantly burning the offering, along with the wood, the stones, and even the water, leaving only dust and a reverent silence. Kneeling, the people recognized the true God, crying out in awe, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is the true God. At that moment, there was no longer any doubt the Lord had answered. Elijah's spiritual authority was unmistakably confirmed, and the crowd finally understood that the drought was a direct consequence of forsaking the Lord. The truth shone more clearly than ever upon Mount Carmel. Then the prophet turned his gaze toward the false prophets of Baal, who prideful now lay in ashes, and commanded their arrest. They were taken to the Kishon Valley, where the judgment the Lord had decreed from ancient times was fulfilled. The execution of all those who had led Israel astray into idolatry. At last the land of Israel began to be purified. As the people witnessed this decisive moment, Elijah suddenly felt something in his spirit he had not sensed in 3 years, the distant whisper of approaching rain. A sound that no one else could hear, but the prophet knew that soon all would recognize it. Then the prophet spoke to King Ahab with authority, "Prepare your chariot and descend immediately, for I hear the roar." A storm was drawing near. Ahab lifted his eyes and saw the sky dry and clear, as it had been for 3 years. Yet he obeyed. The drought had fulfilled its purpose, and now God was ready to open the heavens once more and pour out His mercy. Elijah climbed the mountain again and began to pray earnestly with the faith of one who truly knows the God he serves. Beside him, his servant awaited guidance. "Look toward the sea," Elijah commanded. The young man ran, looked, then returned, breathing heavily. "There is nothing there." Elijah stood firm, confident, and said, "Go back and look again." The servant went a second time, seeing nothing, a third time, a fourth. 6 times he returned with the same report, "Sir, I see nothing." But Elijah would not give up. He continued to pour out his heart, knowing that God was not finished. The seventh time the young servant ran back excitedly, exclaiming in wonder, "Now I see a small cloud rising from the sea, no larger than a man's hand." To Elijah, that was enough. He quickly stood and urgently commanded, "Go and tell Ahab to harness his chariot and go down before the rain stops him." Within minutes, that small cloud grew. The sky darkened swiftly, and from the horizon came a mighty wind. The people looked up in astonishment. After 3 long years, heavy drops of rain began to fall upon the parched earth. "Towards the sea," Elijah commanded. The young boy ran off, looked returned, and answered with labored breath, "There is nothing there." Elijah remained still, and with unwavering faith said, "Go back and look again." The servant went a second time and saw nothing. He went a third, a fourth time. 6 times he returned with the same report, "Sir, I see nothing." But Elijah refused to give up. He continued to pour out his soul, knowing that the Lord was not finished. On the 7th time, the young servant ran back in excitement, exclaiming in astonishment, "Now I see a small cloud rising from the sea, no larger than a man's hand." For Elijah, that was enough. He quickly rose and urgently commanded, "Go, tell Ahab to harness his chariot and descend quickly before the rain hinders him." Within minutes, that small cloud grew larger. The sky darkened swiftly, and a strong wind swept in from the horizon. The people lifted their eyes in awe. After 3 long years, heavy raindrops began to fall on the parched land. In moments, the gentle drizzle turned into a pouring rain, soaking the dry earth and forming new streams, rushing through the cracked and barren ground. Ahab quickly mounted his chariot and started toward Jezreel, driven forward by the heavy rain saturating all around. But then something extraordinary happened. The hand of the Lord rested upon Elijah. The prophet tucked his cloak into his belt and began to run, not as a mere man, but with a supernatural speed, propelled by the very power of God. Before the astonished eyes of the king, the prophet ran faster than the horses, cutting through the storm as if borne on the mighty wind itself. It was a vision of extraordinary might. The one who had shut the heavens now ran ahead of the king, clearly demonstrating who truly ruled Israel. It was not Ahab, nor Jezebel, nor Baal, but the Lord Jehovah, the living God, who gives rain in seasons. Yet this rain was more than water. It was a profound lesson. God answers those who pray persistently. He did not answer Elijah's first prayer, nor the second, nor even the 6th. God only responded after Elijah continued in faithful prayer, fully trusting the promise he had received. The drought was finally ended, and the people experienced the mercy they had long awaited. But the battle was only just beginning, even as the rain poured. In Israel, a furious woman silently brooded in the palace, preparing Elijah for the greatest challenge of his life. In the palace at Jezreel, Jezebel received word Elijah had humiliated her prophets, destroyed her priests, and now even the people were turning against her. Her face twisted in anger. She sent a messenger to the prophet bearing a threat that was not merely a warning, but a promise of death. "May the gods deal harshly with me if by this time tomorrow I have not done to you exactly as you have done to each of them." When Elijah heard these words, fear gripped his heart dark and deep like never before. The very prophet who had boldly stood before hundreds on Mount Carmel and called down fire from heaven now trembled before the wrath of a woman. Without thought or seeking the Lord's counsel, he fled. He ran southward, leaving behind the very people who had just begun to return to God. Abandoning the mission entrusted to him, blinded entirely by fear, he crossed fields and mountains without pause or glance back, like a man pursued by death itself. At last he reached the wilderness alone and utterly exhausted. There in the sparse shade of a broom tree, the prophet collapsed to the ground. He could hold back no longer. Tears streamed down his face. He cried out in anguish toward heaven, "Enough, O Lord! Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." These words poured forth from the depths of his soul. Elijah, the great prophet, had reached the lowest valley. All his strength, faith, and courage seemed to have evaporated under the harsh desert sun. And there beneath the thin shade of that tree, he wished only to close his eyes forever. It was not only Jezebel's threat that broke him, but also the relentless loneliness, the heavy burden of feeling faithful alone, and the deep disappointment that after so much effort, nothing seemed to change. Yet there deep in the desert, in the darkest moment of his life, the Lord did not abandon him. Suddenly, a gentle hand touched him softly. Elijah slowly opened his weary eyes and saw an angel beside him. speaking with a voice gentle but resolute, "Rise and eat." Elijah looked around and saw freshly baked bread upon glowing coals and a jar of cool water. He ate and drank, but the weight in his heart remained too heavy. He sank once more into sleep, hoping again to escape the pain. But the angel returned, patient and full of mercy, touched him and spoke with calm yet firm words. "Rise and eat, for the journey ahead is still long." These words echoed deeply within Elijah's weary heart. The prophet who had fled in despair now moved toward a closer and more profound encounter with the Lord. There on that mountain, at the very place where centuries before God had spoken directly to Moses, Elijah would discover something new. For Elijah was human, deeply human. Though God had used him to perform extraordinary miracles, and though he had witnessed the impossible, now he must face a far harder truth: his own weakness, his human nature. Yet amid that broken humanity, God had mercy on him. For even God's people grow weary, they suffer and doubt. Beneath that broom tree, Elijah understood that God does not only use the strong, but also upholds the broken. Because in our deepest weakness, God's greatest works begin. That meal gave Elijah an inexplicable strength. He rose and began the journey to Horeb. Strengthened by that nourishment, he set out for 40 days and 40 nights, crossing the scorching desert until he reached Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, where he would speak to him directly. Elijah arrived at Mount Horeb, the sacred mountain where centuries before God had given Moses the stone tablets of the law. Exhausted and broken, Elijah entered a dark cave, seeking shelter from the fierce wind. And there, in the profound solitude of the cave, God spoke directly to him. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" With a face still shadowed by sorrow, the prophet answered from the depths of his wounded heart, "O Lord, I have been zealous for you, but the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, destroyed your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left alive, and now they seek to kill me too." Elijah's voice was weak and weary, like that of one who has struggled alone for too long. But God answered without reproach, simply inviting him to step out of the cave and stand upon the mountain, for the Lord himself was about to pass by. Suddenly, a mighty wind arose, so powerful it tore rocks apart and shook the mountain. Elijah clung tightly to the rock, but God was not in the violent wind. Then came an earthquake, shaking the ground beneath him. But God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire blazed, lighting the mountain with consuming heat. Yet God was not in the fire. And then came the silence. An absolute stillness enveloped the mountain. The mountain. From that profound silence emerged something entirely different. A gentle whisper, almost imperceptible, like a soft breeze brushing against the skin. Hearing that gentle whisper, Elijah knew that the Lord was present. He covered his face with his cloak, slowly stepped out of the cave, and stood at its entrance. Within that gentle whisper was the very voice that had created the universe. Yet now that word spoke with the tenderness of a father comforting his weary child. With infinite patience, the Lord asked again, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" The prophet repeated his complaint once more. But this time, in the whisper of heaven, something within him began to heal. The Lord did not accuse or reject him. Instead, he bestowed upon him a new purpose. He spoke clearly with renewed authority. "Return the way you came. You shall anoint Hazael as king of Syria, Jehu as king of Israel, and Elisha as your prophetic successor." Then he revealed a deeper truth Elijah had never known. "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel who have never bowed to Baal or kissed him." Upon hearing these words, the prophet's heart began to beat strongly again. He was not alone. He had never been forsaken. God had preserved a faithful remnant, hidden and protected, waiting for the appointed time to rise. Their calling and purpose were not in vain. Elijah descended Mount Horeb with a renewed heart and clear purpose. He was no longer the man who once wished to die beneath a broom tree. Now he walked with steady steps, understanding that his story was not yet finished and he would not complete it alone. The Lord had given him clear instructions whom to anoint, whom to prepare. Among those names, one stood out with a special purpose: Elisha, son of Shaphat. So he went to the field where Elisha was working. Elisha was neither a priest nor a prophet. He was a farmer plowing with 12 oxen, personally guiding the 12th. His hands were calloused from labor. His cloak, dust covered his back, bent from daily toil. But the Lord had noticed him. Elijah quietly approached, removed his cloak, and laid it upon Elisha. This simple act carried great significance. It was the unmistakable sign of a divine calling, the passing of a sacred mission, and the beginning of a new destiny. Elisha paused. He felt the weight of the cloak upon his shoulders and immediately recognized its meaning. In that moment, he knew his life had forever changed. He ran after Elijah, pleading for one last act of mercy. "Let me kiss my parents goodbye, then I will follow you." Without emotion or hesitation, Elijah replied, "Go back. Do you not realize what I have done to you?" Then something sudden happened. Elisha returned to the fields but did not remain there. He took the oxen he had worked with, slaughtered them, then took the plow wood and tools and set them on fire. On that makeshift altar, he cooked the meat and shared it with the villagers. He burned his past. He left nothing to return to. He offered no excuse or defense. He left all behind and followed Elijah. From that day forward, Elisha became his servant. Many years had passed since the fire on Mount Carmel, and the people of Israel seemed to have forgotten that warning. Israel returned to its old ways, and Ahab, though he had witnessed the power of the Lord, continued to reign as if nothing had changed. He remained a weak king controlled by a ruthless woman named Jezebel. In Samaria, Ahab had all that a king desired: palaces, gardens, gold servants. Yet deep within his heart longed for something more. Near his palace lived a righteous man named Naboth. His vineyard was neither large nor splendid, but it was the inheritance of his ancestors. From the first moment Ahab saw it, he desired it. Approaching Naboth with a false smile, he offered money or even a better vineyard in exchange. But Naboth firmly refused, saying, "May the Lord forbid me to give you the inheritance of my ancestors." Ahab returned to the palace like a spoiled child. He lay on his bed, turned to the wall, and refused to eat. Greed had wounded his pride, and weakness made him bitter. When Jezebel saw his misery, she scornfully asked, "Are you the king of Israel? Rise, eat, and be joyful. I will obtain Naboth's vineyard for you." And she did. With cold cruelty, she wrote letters in the king's name, sealed with the royal seal, declaring a fast and arranging for Naboth to sit in a place of honor. But beside him, two wicked men sat down, and before the entire assembly accused Naboth. He was charged with cursing God and the king. Without trial or defense, Naboth was dragged away. The city was stoned to death. His crime was to stand up and defend what was rightfully his. When the news reached Jezebel, she smiled with satisfaction and said to Ahab, "Arise and take possession of the vineyard. Naboth is no longer alive." Ahab went to admire his new land, rejoicing like a cherished child, believing he had won. But as he walked through the vineyard, Elijah suddenly appeared, his face stern with judgment. The king trembled when he saw this sight and asked, "So you have found me, my enemy?" Elijah answered without hesitation, "Yes, I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do evil in the sight of the Lord." And once again Elijah pronounced the verdict, declaring, "Thus says the Lord, in the very place where dogs lick Naboth's blood, they will lick your blood as well. I will bring disaster upon you, destroy your lineage, and annihilate your house just as I did to Jeroboam. Jezebel, your wife, will be devoured by dogs near the city walls of Jezreel. Anyone of your house who dies in the city will be eaten by dogs, and whoever dies in the fields will be devoured by birds of the air." Ahab's face turned pale. For the first time, Elijah's voice did not sound like that of an enemy, but as that of a judge. And this time Ahab neither shouted nor cursed, nor did he summon his soldiers. He tore his clothes, wore sackcloth, began fasting, and lay silent, refusing to eat. He walked slowly with his head bowed, tears falling like rain from heaven. Seeing this, the Lord spoke again to Elijah. "Because Ahab humbled himself before me, I will not bring disaster during his lifetime, but in the lifetime of his son, I will bring calamity upon his house." Ahab had been warned. He would pay a heavy price for the idolatry and corruption he had spread throughout Israel. Yet years passed, and Ahab believed perhaps the Lord had forgotten his judgment. He was mistaken. He resolved to go to war to reclaim the city of Ramoth-Gilead from Syria. Though a prophet warned him he would surely die, Ahab ignored the voice of the Lord. He disguised, believing he could defy fate. Yet an arrow shot at random pierced through his armor, striking the most vulnerable spot. As the battle continued, Ahab lay silent, bleeding inside his chariot until he died at sunset. When they washed his chariot, dogs licked his blood, just as the prophet Elijah had foretold. And Ahab died, the worst king Israel had ever known. His son Ahaziah ascended the throne. Not long after, Ahaziah followed the corrupt path his parents had set. One day Ahaziah fell through the lattice window of his upper chamber in the palace at Samaria. Gravely wounded and confined to bed, the young king made a decision that would seal his fate. Instead of seeking the Lord God of Israel, he sent messengers to Ekron, a city of the Philistines, to inquire of Baal-zebub, the pagan god of flies and disease. But the Lord saw this and commanded Elijah, "Arise, intercept the king's messengers and say to them, 'Is there no God in Israel that you must go to Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, for counsel? Therefore the Lord declares, you shall not rise from your bed, but surely shall die.'" Elijah obeyed, and the message quickly reached the palace. Ahaziah asked in surprise, "What sort of man came to meet you?" They answered, "He was a man clothed in a garment of hair, with a leather belt around his waist." Elijah immediately recognized this as the prophet Elijah of Tishbe. The king flew into a rage and sent a captain with 50 soldiers to seize him. They found the prophet calmly sitting on the hilltop. The captain arrogantly shouted, "You man of God, the king commands you to come down." But Elijah replied, "If I am truly a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And so it was. A roar tore through the sky, fire descended, and consumed the captain and his soldiers instantly. Their screams fell silent, reduced to ashes. Ahaziah, stubborn in his rebellion, sent another captain with 50 more men. The outcome was the same fire judgment, death. But the third captain was different. He came without command or threat. He knelt, raised his hands, and pleaded, "Man of God, I beg you spare my life and the lives of these 50 servants before you." And this time the Lord spoke to Elijah, "Go down with him, do not fear." The prophet rose and accompanied the third captain to the palace. With authority, he stood before Ahaziah's bed and reaffirmed the prophecy. The Lord declared, "Because you sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, as if there were no God in Israel, you will not leave the bed you lie on. You shall surely die." And so it came to pass. Ahaziah died just as the Lord had spoken through his prophet. Along with him, another link was broken, the line of Ahab, bearing the full weight of divine judgment. The death of Ahaziah marked the end of a generation. He left no son to succeed the throne, and the house of Ahab began to crumble like a wall cracked from within. Yet even as judgment unfolded within the palace, something sacred stirred along the streets. For now Elisha was preparing to depart, not to death, but to eternity. Elisha knew the end had come. His soul, tempered through years of listening to the voice of the Lord, sensed it with absolute clarity. His time on earth was finished, but his farewell would not be silent, nor would he face it alone. From Gilgal, the prophet began his final journey. Elisha rose early that day. The desert wind was gentler than usual, and the sun had not yet fully risen, but Elisha was already on his way. Beside him was Elisha, his disciple and successor, the young man who had left everything to follow him. And from that day forward, he never left his side, not for a single day. At every stop, Elisha tested the heart of Elisha. When they reached the gates of the promised land, Elisha said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha did not hesitate. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as surely as you live, I will never leave you." And they continued on. Upon arriving at Bethel, the group of prophets came out to meet them. They pulled Elisha aside and whispered, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master from you?" Elisha only nodded. "Yes, I know. Be silent." They pressed onward, and once again Elisha said to him, "Stay here, Marquis, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But Elisha's answer remained unchanged. He refused to leave his master. So they came to Jericho, a city famous for miracles concerning its ancient crumbling walls. Here again the prophets approached Elisha and repeated their grave warning. But Elisha, in sorrowful silence, once more replied, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Finally, they reached the Jordan River, the sacred river. It was the threshold separating the human world from the divine realm. 50 prophets watched them from afar, witnessing this eternal, fateful moment. Then Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. Instantly, the water parted just as it had in the time of Moses. The river split left and right, opening a dry path for the two to cross safely. At that moment, Elijah paused. He knew his journey was near its end, yet he could not leave without passing on his legacy. He turned to Elisha and said solemnly, Ask for whatever you want me to do for you before I am taken from you." Without hesitation, Elisha boldly requested the impossible. "Please grant me a double portion of your spirit." Elijah looked at him intently, fully aware of the audacity, faith, and burden behind such a request. "You have asked a difficult thing," he replied, "but if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be granted." They continued walking in silence as the sun began to set. Just as dusk fell, suddenly the sky opened, a whirlwind descended from heaven, sand swirling wildly, winds howling with supernatural force, and a miracle appeared. A fiery chariot drawn by fiery horses rushed down like a blazing arrow from above. With mighty winds, the whirlwind lifted, Elijah enveloped in fire, embraced by glory. Elisha cried out with the anguish of a son, but no one remained. Elijah was taken to heaven without tasting death. His cloak drifted slowly to the ground, gently touching the earth. Elisha picked it up, his hands trembling, forever changed. It was a witness, a sign that the spirit that once empowered the fervent prophet now rested upon him. He returned to the Jordan River, the very river they had crossed together before. Striking his master's cloak down into the water, he shouted, "Lord, the God of Elijah, where are you now?" And once again the Jordan River parted as the prophets bowed their heads reverently. They no longer saw Elisha as a mere servant. Now the spirit of Elijah dwelled upon him. Elijah had ascended, but his fire was not extinguished. It had simply changed hands. That day at the crossing of the Jordan, the prophetic legacy lived on. Though Elijah had departed, his word remained. God had not forgotten his promise to judge the house of Ahab, nor the innocent bloodshed in Naboth's vineyard. And now in the days of, burdened with the sorrow of a son, but no one remained behind. Elijah had been taken to heaven without tasting death. His cloak slowly drifted down to the ground, gently touching the earth. Elisha picked it up, his hand trembling, forever changed. It was a witness, a sign that the spirit which had once empowered the fervent prophet now rested upon him. He returned to the Jordan River, the very river they had crossed together before. Throwing the mantle of his master into the water, he cried out, "Lord God of Elijah, where are you now?" And once again the Jordan parted as the prophets bowed their heads in reverence. They no longer regarded Elisha as a servant. Now the spirit of Elijah rested upon him. Elijah had ascended, yet his fire had not been extinguished. It had merely changed hands. That day at the crossing of the Jordan, the prophetic legacy lived on. Though Elijah was gone, his word remained. God did not forget his promise to judge the house of Ahab, nor the innocent blood spilled in Naboth's vineyard. And now in the days of Elisha, that promise would rise with relentless power. Judgment had come. And when the time was right, God raised Jehu, a general in Israel's army, a mighty warrior, resolute, decisive, and fearless. Then the Lord spoke through Elisha, giving clear instructions. He sent a young prophet to him, the military camp where Jehu was stationed. The prophet anointed Jehu's head and declared, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I have anointed you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. You shall strike down the house of Ahab and avenge the blood of my servants the prophets. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, not a single man will survive. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her body in Jezreel, and no one shall bury her." Before Jehu could answer, the young prophet vanished like a whisper into the shadows. Jehu stepped outside with his followers, his head anointed with oil, and his eyes blazing with fire. His companions looked at him expectantly. "What does that madman want? What did he say to you?" At first Jehu hesitated, but then he looked them squarely in the eyes and boldly declared, "He has anointed me king over Israel." Immediately they rose, each placing their garment at Jehu's feet as a sign of loyalty. They blew trumpets and shouted, "Jehu is king." And in that moment the revolution began. Suddenly, Jehu leapt onto his war chariot and rushed toward Jezreel like a whirlwind. First he went straight to Naboth's vineyard, the very land Jezebel had stolen after having that righteous man killed, to give it to her husband Ahab. There he met Joram, Ahab's second son and the current king of Israel, along with Ahaziah, king of Judah, who was visiting at the time. Without hesitation, Jehu drew his bow and shot an arrow straight into Joram's heart, proclaiming, "Here on Naboth's land the Lord will repay you." The king's body fell exactly where Naboth was slain. Ahaziah tried to flee but could not get far. He was struck down by Jehu's soldiers and fell at Megiddo. The prophecy was fulfilled in every detail, but justice was not yet complete. One name remained: Jezebel. The queen was in her palace at Jezreel, and upon hearing Jews approach, she steeled herself. She applied her eye makeup, adjusted her hair, and looked out the window to see Jews' arrival from afar. "You come here in peace, do you, Zimri, the murderer of your master?" she mocked him, shouting from her palace window. Joe looked up and called to the people below, "Who will stand with me?" 2 or 3 officials appeared at the window. Joe commanded, "Throw her down, cast her out." And so they pushed her from the window. Jezebel's body crashed to the ground below. Her blood splattered against the walls and the horses trampled her mercilessly. Then Jehu ordered her burial, but when they came to retrieve her body, it was nowhere to be found. Only fragments remained, pieces of her feet and palms. The dogs had devoured her flesh, just as Elijah had prophesied. Thus the Lord's word was fulfilled. Ahab's family was utterly destroyed. His children, allies, and priests all fell beneath Jehu's sword, enacting divine judgment. Yet Jehu did not stop there. One by one, every child of Ahab was executed, all 70. Descendants were beheaded. Next came the servants, advisors, false prophets, and all those connected to the throne in Samaria. In a single campaign, Jehu annihilated Ahab's entire household. Every judgment of the Lord was fulfilled without exception. The blood of the prophets was finally avenged, and Elijah's legacy, even after his ascension, continued to blaze like fire upon the earth. Though Elijah was no longer present among men, his spirit did not vanish. Many centuries later, a new prophecy arose, spoken through the last prophet before the great silence, Malachi. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a curse." He did not speak of the Elijah of the past, but of an Elijah yet to come, of a prophetic spirit who would once again awaken sleeping hearts, call for truth amid complacency, and prepare the way for judgment and restoration. This is the declaration before the end. Elijah shall return before the glorious and fearful day of the Lord. A voice like his, a call like his, will be heard once more. This is not merely a promise, it is a warning. This means the story of Elijah the prophet, who never dies, is not yet complete. According to Scripture, he will return. And when he does, the world must be ready. From Elijah, we learn that the Lord walks with us and sustains us when we stumble. We know that even the bravest sometimes feel fear, even the most faithful servants falter. And even prophets can feel lonely, empty, and near collapse. And now this story calls to you. Yes, perhaps you have faced doubt, fear, or moments of deep spiritual exhaustion. Have you ever felt this struggle too great to bear? As if you were alone? As if the world around you has forgotten the Lord? Perhaps you, like Elijah, have felt the urge to hide under a broom tree, wanting only to give up. Listen closely, the Lord has not finished his work with you. When Elijah was weary and powerless, God did not abandon him, nor did he rebuke him for his fall. Instead, he fed him, touched him, and renewed his strength. And then he spoke to him again. Perhaps right now you are in that place, wounded inside and worn out. Today the Lord is calling you. For if there is one lesson we learn from Elijah, it is that the Lord does not choose the perfect. He chooses those who are willing, those who listen with faith. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone struggling with doubt or feeling alone, please share this video with them. It may be exactly what they need today. Support this video by liking it, and do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the upcoming life-changing biblical stories. Blessings to you and your family.